Newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I'm happy to report that at last we have found a party of freedom and fiscal responsibility. At least as it pertains to a couple of issues. Let me explain exactly what that looks like. We'll start with a headline from the Idaho Press. Bill for Idaho legislature's private attorneys to defend abortion laws tops $250,000. Lo and behold, Betsy Russell, who can be very reliably counted on to stand up for the political left in virtually everything that she writes, suddenly has found fiscal responsibility. Now, of course, it's because there's money being spent to defend the state against a number of lawsuits, at least 3 different lawsuits, challenging Idaho's trigger law, which went into effect following the overturn of Roe v. Wade earlier this year. Isn't it interesting? You know, I mean, look, I know this is painting with a broad brush, but I think if you look at the current Democratic administration in Washington, D.C., they have outspent even the Republicans, who are no slackers when it comes to spending other people's money. And yet with trillions of dollars being spent, billions of dollars being spent, I mean, what drunken sailors are blushing at, oh my gosh, these guys are spending like crazy. $275,000 or so seems to be a very big amount in the minds of the political left right now, because it's money that has been spent to defend innocent life and to uphold abortion laws. Now, look, I'm not saying you have to agree, you know, with Idaho's abortion laws, but the fact of the matter is, with Roe v. Wade being overturned, the issue was kicked back to the states where it rightfully belonged all along. And Idaho is a state that traditionally has embraced conservative values that have respect for that innocent life, which means that the people who are representing us in the legislature passed laws protecting innocent life. Now, if you want abortion on demand, anytime, anywhere, no one is holding you prisoner here in the state of Idaho. Just a short drive up the road, you can find a state that will provide exactly what you need. But that's not good enough. And I think this is kind of the essence of statism, whether it's right-wing or left-wing statism. Statism is the idea that it has to be imposed on people because if the state's not in charge, then by some definition, it's got to be out of control. Let's take a look at a couple particulars here in Betsy's article. She says the bill for the legislature's private legal team defending the state's abortion laws against multiple lawsuits, in addition to the defense of the laws already provided by the Idaho Attorney General's office, has now topped $250,000. Now, listen to this observation. Taxpayers are paying the bills. Newsflash, Betsy, if government is doing it, taxpayers are always paying the bills. So might want to clutch those pearls just a little less tightly at this revelation, which, according to records obtained under the Idaho Public Records Act, add up to $276,495 so far. Idaho House Speaker Scott Bedke and Senate President Pro Tem Chuck Winder hired Nampa attorney Daniel Bauer and Las Vegas attorney Monty Neal Stewart to argue specifically on the legislature's behalf. Now, the money is coming from the Legislative Legal Defense Fund, which lawmakers created in 2012. They've spent nearly $10 million from the fund since then. In 2021, lawmakers deposited another $4 million in state general funds into the account. And this year, the Idaho legislature passed a new law to specifically authorize either or both houses of the legislature to intervene in lawsuits challenging Idaho laws whenever they choose to do so. So it may seem like, wow, are they just doing this because it's their own little private, legal hobby fund? No, they are doing this on behalf of the people of Idaho, who elected them, put them in office, and who support, at least enough of them support these policies to make them worth defending. Now, this doesn't mean every law passed by the Idaho legislature is somehow sacrosanct or is necessarily a good thing. Sometimes there are laws that need to be reviewed, and we sometimes have laws that are kicked up to the state Supreme Court and so forth. But in this case, it's the federal government that is coming after Idaho and suing for the sake of we've got to make abortion easier and more available on demand anytime, anywhere, whereas the people of Idaho, through their elected representatives, have said, no, that's not what we support and that's not what we want. So I hate to see money spent on legal proceedings, but that's the society we live in. Things are very litigious, and that's unfortunately a necessity. And in the grand scheme of things, with billions and trillions being thrown around, I'd say that they've actually spent pretty wisely at least as far as these latest abortion laws. All right, moving on to another headline. Oh boy. Is it a good thing that Raul Labrador was elected to Attorney General in the November election? Take a look at this op-ed headline. This is from Larry LaRocco, was published in the Idaho Statesman. Hires of David Dewhurst and Theo Wald signal that Idaho's new Attorney General is more committed to ideology than to his state. I didn't even know Larry LaRocco was still around, but he was a former state representative back in, actually, he may actually have been a congressman. Sorry. My apologies, Larry. But anyway, he's back, and you can't see it so well. It's down there in the fine print at the bottom of the page. Labrador kicks off campaign for Idaho governor with extremist hires in AG's office. Okay, now he never deigns to tell us what the extremism is, but let's take a peek into this op-ed, and we'll get a little bit of a sense of what's stuck in Larry LaRocco's craw. From news reports, which we all know we can trust, the legacy media, right? We learned that Dewhurst and Wald are deeply embedded in MAGA world and the right-wing ideology of the Idaho Freedom Foundation. They have been briefly touching down in places where political ideology appears to trump legal work, as if legal work is the highest form of morality. Nonetheless, it will be interesting to see if Idaho isn't another whistle stop on their journey to far-right places. Boy, could we drop the word far-right and right-wing just a few more times? This is the kind of fear-mongering buzzword that is supposed to invoke some sense of suspicion, revulsion, or just outright fright, and steer you to a conclusion that, well, apparently Larry LaRocco would like you to go to. Now, he says, I would feel better if I knew that they loved to recreate on public lands, fished for steelhead in clear rivers, stood strongly for public education, recognized our city's policies against discrimination, and supported women's reproductive rights. So basically, he's spinning the left-wing agenda, which is government ownership and management of lands. Okay, that's the public lands defense. Clean rivers. Okay, we love clean rivers too, but only with very strict environmental policies enforced from the very top can we enjoy those things. Again, statism. If it's not under the control of the state, it's by definition out of control. Standing strongly for public education, by which he means state-run or government-run schools, recognizing our city's policies against discrimination. That's just a nice way of defending laws that create what's called forced association. I know this might come as a surprise to some, but when you force people to associate, it doesn't do anything to heal rifts or to otherwise cause people to like each other and get along. In fact, if anything, it creates resentment. Maybe that's a subject for another time. And of course, supporting women's reproductive rights, which is the only way that we are allowed to consider abortion. It's never about the innocent life that is in jeopardy. It's only about the woman's right to an abortion anytime, anywhere. And listen to this line. We know freedom when we see it, and we don't need others with political agendas to tutor us. Oh, please, Larry LaRocco, give us your sophisticated tutelage so that we may know the truth. Now, he says Labrador can continue to disparage Idaho journalists at his pleasure. I'm sorry, but sometimes they do need to be disparaged, like when they're misleading or just flat out not telling the truth. But he and his team should remember there are many eyes watching him as he tries to conform Idaho's legal team to his extremist views. No context for what makes them extreme. We're just supposed to take his word. They're extreme because he said so. We have a sense of justice and fairness. Yes, as long as you're doing what we say. We know true north. But we still believe that a man in a dress is really a woman, and that guys in lingerie twerking in front of kids is somehow really a good thing. But they know true north. Don't you ever forget. Welcome, Mr. Dewhurst and Mr. Wald, but please know this is not our first right-wing rodeo. Idahoans have weathered many assaults on our values from charlatans who thought we just fell off a beat truck. If it makes people like Larry LaRocco and others on the political left this upset, I'm going to have to say it's probably a good thing that Raul Labrador was elected Attorney General. As my friend Dustin Hurst with the Idaho Freedom Foundation says, the next 4 years are going to be glorious. And I look at the media spin, whether it's the legacy media or whether it's left-wing commentators like Larry LaRocco, and I think the spin is so hard. How would they have reported something like the cleansing of the temple from the New Testament? Probably something like this. Fake news inspires local right-wing conspiracy theorists to violently purge well-meaning philanthropists from a temple in a dark anti-Semitic hate crime. All right. Moving on. You ready for some good news? Here is some good news. You have heard, as I have heard, over and over again, Idaho's public schools do not get enough money. If we would just fully fund them like the Constitution says we should, then we should be able to solve the problems with public education. And again, this is only for government-run schools. Well, there's a marvelous article recently published by Caitlin Shepard and Fred Birnbaum with the Idaho Freedom Foundation. You can find it at idahofreedom.org. K through 12 public schools have surpassed funding targets, but the results have not improved. Here are a couple quick excerpts. In less than 2 months' time, Idaho's new legislature will convene. One of its tasks will be to decide how to allocate the $330 million in ongoing funding that was earmarked for K through 12 public education by Governor Brad Little and the legislature in September. Voices from the establishment will clamor for the money to be distributed to public schools. Despite massive increases in spending on public schools, voices from within the system still demand more money. Spending levels are higher than they've been in decades. But here's the kicker. Yet increased spending on public education has not resulted in a positive return for taxpayers. Student test scores have remained stagnant or declined. Schools increasingly push corrupt ideologies into the classroom. Instead of throwing more money at a system that's not accountable for academic improvement, the $330 million increase in education spending should follow students so that families can decide how best to educate their children. Now, those words are like burning coals being stuffed into the ears of people on the political left, because that would mean actually giving control away back to the parents for whom these decisions really rightly belong. It's not about dismantling public education. Here's the thing. Public education will actually work very well for many people. In fact, there are a lot of parents that are very happy with the public school system. But the one-size-fits-all approach, that's kind of a hallmark of central planning, which is a hallmark of collectivism, which rhymes with socialism and communism. So let them have choice. Let them have innovation. Let there be choices when that money follows the students rather than simply props up systems that, no matter how much money you give it, don't really seem to improve on their promises to deliver better education or a better academic experience. It's not the same thing as saying education doesn't matter. It's more like an acknowledgement that just because you're used to doing it one way doesn't mean that that's the only way that it could possibly ever be done. So don't be bamboozled when someone says, well, this is just an attempt to destroy public education. No, it will actually help it, because there are people who will be very happy to continue to send their kids to public schools. But for those who aren't, maybe they deserve that choice. Unless, of course, there's some other agenda at work here where, there are collectivists trying to get young minds all in the same place and feed them all the same indoctrination for some reason. Nah, that couldn't be the case. Never. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.